Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Great Tech Interview Playbook. I'm Josh Jones, and I'm excited to welcome you to this session on how engineering and hiring teams are rethinking technical interviews to better reflect the real work and collaboration that matters most. We're joined today by an incredible lineup of experts. We've got Ron Fish, Nathan Sutter, Ambra Benjamin, Tim Kamanat. I did it, Tim. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. I promise.
And Lyneric Muldrow, each bringing a ton of expertise in modern technical interviewing. Before we dive in, just a few housekeeping notes. If you'd like to engage with our wonderful speakers here or with fellow attendees, use the chat feature in the upper right-hand part of your screen. If you have specific questions, please try to use the Q&A tab so that we can find them quickly. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll release the recording within 24 hours of the webinar ending. Today's webinar has been made possible by our good friends over at CoderPad. CoderPad enables AI-aware, realistic assessments that measure how candidates actually work with modern AI tools, so you get a stronger signal, evaluations that are more fair, and faster decisions. Also, I'm going to be posting a special offer shortly. It's a chance to book a 30-minute lunch and learn session on smarter technical hiring strategies. If you schedule with that link, it includes up to $100 DoorDash lunch for your team. So definitely something you want to sign up for. With that, Ron, I'm going to hand things over to you. Thank you so much for moderating today's discussion. If you have any questions, if you need anything at all, just holler. I'll be watching from the audience side.
Cool, and we'll edit out that whole name faux pas in post-production, Josh. Don't worry. Not really. In any case, hey, everybody, Ron Fish here. I am a global talent acquisition leader, currently consulting with an organization called Abacus Insights that occupies the healthcare technology data analytics space. And I'm super excited to be participating in this panel, leading the panel today with this great cast of characters here. Want to also give the opportunity for them to introduce themselves. So Nathan, you want to go ahead and first tell us who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Nathan Sutter. I'm the VP of Engineering here at CoderPad. I am a backend engineer by trade. I've been managing people for, the last 12 years, running businesses, helping businesses grow for the last 8 or so. And I've been a CoderPad customer for as long as I've been hiring people. So longtime fan before I came on board. Super excited to talk about this. These are the kinds of sessions I'd love to do to talk about what good hiring looks like. So yeah, delighted to be here.
Thanks, Nathan. Tim, let's pass it over to you. And I always have to comment on that amazing head of hair you have there that I'm jealous of. Most guys are. In any case, tell us who you are.
Appreciate you, Ron. Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Kamanat. I am coming out of Cedar, a Series D health tech, fintech startup based in New York City. I've been here for the last 4.5 years, leading our engineering hiring as one of our lead technical recruiters. I actually just wrapped up my time at Cedar last week, so I'm in my week off right now before I move on to my next gig. Let's definitely connect on LinkedIn if you're looking at where I'm going to be going next, but looking forward to sharing some insights with y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Ambra, how about you?
Hi, all. Ambra Benjamin. I lead technical recruiting at Datadog, which is based in New York as well. I sit in Atlanta, Georgia.
Awesome. And last but not least, Lyneric, tell us about you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, by the way, Ron, Josh. My name is Lyneric Muldrow. I do not have a good head of hair like Tim. Nathan and I share the same barber, but I've been in recruiting for about 15 years. I started my own consulting company about 4 years back. Currently consulting with Bumble, helping them grow their engineering presence in Austin, Texas.
Awesome. Thanks. I have a little more hair, maybe, but it is obviously all turned gray because of the wisdom. I call it Arctic blonde, and I still keep it spiky in the front, so you know I'm a little bit dangerous, and not all washed up. So last comment from the peanut gallery there. We're going to jump in. So we're going to start talking about this technical interviewing side of things and really dig in here deep. And first, we're going to talk from the standpoint of real world interview design and like what's working, what's not working. Nathan, if you don't mind, I'm going to put our sponsor representative on the spot first. So in your estimation, what does real world technical interviewing actually look like for today's top engineering teams?
Yeah, so I'm going to give y'all the pitch that I give every single one of our customers. A real world technical interview mirrors as close to as possible day one on the job. So it uses the tools that are necessary for that person to do the job that you're interviewing them for, including AI, which I'm sure you will hear a lot throughout this webinar. It is realistic. It's solving a problem that they would solve on the job. Which means sort of the opposite of like gotcha questions or leak code type questions being asked anywhere in the funnel. And it's collaborative, right? So it has literally everything that you would do with somebody on their first day of working. So everything from pair programming to debugging, to working through architecture problems, to really just focusing on solving those real world problems with the tools that they use on the job. And yes, everybody uses AI who is writing code these days, so it includes that.
Awesome. And I just got a text from Leneric. It said, let me in on this. So Leneric, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yes, I do. I think that the landscape of technical recruiting is changing, and especially from a candidate's perspective. I think with the evolution of AI and LLMs and it's the new buzzword and the new big thing out there. I think that we have to change on how we're assessing backgrounds to make sure that we are filtering the right candidates into the right opportunities and making the best hiring decisions for both the candidate and the company. And so I think that this ever-changing landscape is something that, I'm happy to be on the forefront of within TA, because we're essentially we're the first line of defense. And if we're not equipping ourselves to, essentially change with these times, then unfortunately the way that we've recruited in the past, that old saying, what got you here won't get you there, we'll need to evolve that. So.
Great. Awesome input. I appreciate that. Tim, let me put you on the spot. How are companies designing interviews that simulate day-to-day work? Nathan kind of highlighted this without requiring hours and hours of candidate time. I think we all in recruiting have seen the take-home test. You've got to, work on some product spec and spend 3 hours of time before you even get a first interview with a face. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think both Leneric and Nathan hit the nail on the head with their responses on the last question. But we want to make sure that we're testing people for how they actually work on the job. We want to see how they're actually going to work on a Tuesday afternoon, as opposed to testing people to perform in an artificial interview environment. I think both of them hit on how it is that we're incorporating AI into the interview process. But talking to a lot of the top candidates out there, they want to be tested on the ways that they're actually going to be working. And if you're going to expect them to utilize and leverage AI in the day-to-day at your company, and you're not incorporating it into your interview process, that's actually a huge red flag for candidates in their mind. I think another important thing that you just covered is that if we are creating interview questions that require hours and hours of time commitment from candidates, that is actually not creating an equitable interview process, because not everyone has 4 hours plus of work to be able to build a greenfield project from scratch. It's actually optimizing for the folks that have a ton of time on their hands. But for the candidates that may be working a full-time job still while they're job searching, they don't have that type of time to be able to commit to something like that. And so we've actually seen a massive drop-off rate in our interview processes that have required take-home assignments in the past as well. So we want to make them practical. We want to make them bite-sized in terms of the scope and the time commitment. So a lot of focus on creating evaluations that only last about 60 to 90 minutes maximum when it comes to the technical interviews.
Yeah, assessment fatigue is a real thing, right? Anybody else have any thoughts from the panel on that?
I think the one thing I just chime in on is I think it's also when a company can, I think it is good to give a candidate options. Because I think back in the day when it was all on a whiteboard, every coding interview was on a whiteboard. And, there were some people even then where that was a challenging way for them to actually code and demonstrate what they could actually do. And so, we would offer a laptop, right? Like in the office or something, right? Where it's like, all right, you don't want to do a whiteboard here. Like what is the flow you need to be in to be able to be your optimal self? And so we too have kind of sunsetted a lot of the take homes, but I will say, I think it's a good thing to keep in the back pocket for the right candidate, right? Like I think when we think about people from non-traditional backgrounds, maybe someone has never done a coding interview before, and so the idea of that is actually like nerve-wracking in a way that maybe wouldn't allow for them to perform well. I know, like, of course, obviously it's very easy now for someone to cheat a take home, right? It always kind of has been. But it's like the idea, like, can you talk through your solution and actually how you arrived at this? So there are a subset of people that actually perform better if they're given the ability to, take something and do it on their own time. But I think the force function of like making someone do a take home is the part that I think we wholeheartedly reject. But maybe keeping that in the pocket as a company to show that, like, hey, we're willing to work with you on what's going to be the best way, because ultimately all we really care about is like, if we hire you, are you going to be good, not are you going to be able to ace an interview?
Yeah, and I've always subscribed to the sort of notion that interview behavior is not necessarily work behavior, right? Because it's pressure packed. I might be nervous. I might know it cold, but I freeze up. So great points, Amber. I definitely echo those sentiments for sure. Nathan, hey, let's shift back over to you, put you on the spot again. Can you share an example of a technical task that is authentic and aligned with actual role responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've, I'm not going to name drop companies, but we've got a variety of customers who do autonomous driving. And so we have, they do a great job interviewing candidates, and their interviews, and we help them create these, their interviews are literally make a change in the product. So present them with something that is very close to what is in the product and walk them through, hey, here's a technical specification. How would you break this down into individual tasks? You scope that into a 60-minute window, right? So that they don't, spend 3 days on it. But it's literally taking something that they would be doing on a day-to-day, building it into the product that is literally what they would be doing on the job. That is, that's the optimal interview, which is the opposite of like, solve a toy problem for me that has nothing to do with the space that I'm in, has nothing to do with the technology I use, which effectively just tests memorization, which is completely useless. People can memorize things all day long. It does not correlate at all with how well they do on the job. So just going to beat up one of our customers for a minute. They do a great job interviewing candidates because they literally have them build something into the product that's as good as you could get.
Awesome. Any other thoughts on that? All right, we'll jump down. So now let's shift gears a little bit. Let's start to talk about sort of from theory to application. Tim, why are theoretical algorithm questions falling out of favor with modern teams?
Yeah, Nathan started to touch on some of this already in his answer to the last question. But first and foremost, candidates hate them loudly. Here at Cedar, where I've been for the last 4.5 years, we have shifted entirely away for a number of years now from lead code style assessments. You being able to tell me how to land a rover on Mars tells me nothing about how well you could do in our environment. So we want to focus on the things that you're actually doing on the job. And we hear feedback on it from every candidate that makes it through our interview process about how much they enjoyed the ability to work on something that was real world, as opposed to being thrown into some obscure lead code style assessment. Nathan said it, and I thought he hit the nail on the head with, they oftentimes measure preparation, not actual performance. There's tons of lead code prep interview material out there. And so somebody who has, a month to be able to prepare and dive through every lead code assessment that's out there on the web and study for them has a much higher chance of performing well in one of those interviews than somebody who may actually be better equipped and more of a fit for the job. algorithm trivia does not equal engineering excellence. And so, they create the wrong incentives, and, we're really not testing for the right things to be able to evaluate on job performance is really what I think it boils down to. But would love to hear from anybody else if they have any other thoughts on this.
Yeah, I can chime in on that one. I think that I've seen it work both for and against companies, depending on, I guess, the candidate and the assessment. I think that in if there's a fungible skill set for some of these larger tech companies, it's easier to try to take a baseline fundamental, which we boil down to algorithms and data structures, to just make sure, hey, do you understand the proper object-oriented fundamentals and the proper object-oriented concepts to be able to go read and write code and deliver a scalable solution in that hour time that we have, or hour and a half, however long it may be. And for some companies that works because they get the key data points that they need to say, hey, this person at least passes this. Let's go evaluate them a little bit further. Where I think it does go a little bit awry is when you're over-indexing on, oh, this person didn't incorporate the proper, syntax. Like if they get down to like the syntactical error, then I think they were starting to nitpick on, certain aspects that candidates probably, if given a chance and opportunity to elaborate on there, if they have more time, they can probably dissect and get down to the solution that I think the interviewers are looking for. But it's when the candidate doesn't know how their background will be assessed. I think that's when you run into those problems at the, data structures algorithm type of question, where I think most companies still have it to some extent, even though they may not come out and say, hey, we're going to test for this. I think that is a fundamental knowledge that is needed for any development, even with the use of AI that's been incorporated. We still need to understand how candidates are going to be prompting, or how candidates are going to read and write what's being outputted from an LLM to say, yes, we're going down this right path, or yes, we know what we're doing, or we know how to read how this is going. But I'll save that comment for another topic that we have down there a little bit later. But I play devil's advocate on that, because depending on the type of hiring that you're doing, it may be very, very useful to understand those building blocks.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think some companies do some of these things really well and others don't, and it depends on the overall approach. So I love the sentiment that was mentioned, I think by Tim, where it's like, take candidate feedback. If you're getting a lot of scathing reviews on a certain topic, then either you're reaching out to the wrong types of candidates, or maybe there's something you need to look at to kind of re-engineer the way you're approaching it overall. So, love when we're also taking into account that candidate feedback and implementing that into the process as well. So Amber, I'm going to shift over to you. What types of applied challenges are proving more effective at identifying high quality engineers?
I mean, I think Nathan kind of called some of this out in his early. I feel like his first answer to your opening question was like so robust that he just kind of knocked down a lot of the topics all in one. But I think the open-ended design prompts, right? Like understanding, does the engineer understand like reliability, scalability, right? Like what is it going to take to maintain, right, in a real world scenario? Things like debugging, right? Nathan mentioned that as well, like debugging something that's broken, designing a feature from end to end, like a realistic challenge that an engineer is going to be asked to do on a day-to-day basis. I think somebody had mentioned paired programming. I think is also like a good way to assess, and I think it's something I've always seen historically, just over the years, candidates give really good feedback on that experience. We're hearing now, this idea of vibe coding, right? And like, this is something that we're doing in our company. This is something that we're asking engineers to experiment with, and I wouldn't be surprised if that enters its way into the interview scenarios as well. Of like, all right, if you were asked to vibe code this, like, what would it look like? Let's work on it together. Like, let's see how you would approach it. One of the things that as a technical recruiter, I always emphasize with candidates when I was preparing them, first of all, I would prepare them. And I think that's something that a company can do and should be doing, a recruiter should be doing, is like giving a candidate a roadmap of like, hey, here's what your interview process is going to look like. These are the types of questions you're going to get. There's not going to be any gotchas. Like it's going to be something similar to, to this. But I would always tell candidates, like, talk out loud. Like, explain what you're doing and why you're doing it, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to make a mistake. You're going to miss something. There's going to be something that you overlook that someone might think. Don't leave room for the interviewer to think you missed it because you actually don't know what you're doing, or it's clear that you could talk to somebody and you hear them talking through how they're arriving at their solution, and you're like, all right, this person actually does completely understand how they're approaching this. I like their logic. It's very clear that if they had maybe more tools and resources at their disposal, they would probably be able to arrive at the right outcome, whether or not it's the right answer, or how is probably the most important thing. So I think sometimes too, being able to see how someone arrives at their solution and hearing them talk aloud, here's why I'm doing this. I'm looking out for this, but I'm I think that's the main thing. And so I think if you can incorporate real world scenarios where the candidate feels like they're working in a meeting live with another engineer or someone that they might be working with on a project, that always is a good way to, first of all, let somebody kind of bring their guard down a little bit, but also allows the interviewer to see how would that person be to work with, and do they actually understand where they go, and what resources they're missing right now to be able to solve this.
Yeah, awesome. I think there's a vibe coding, and then you and Nathan are vibing because he was about to come through the camera. So Nathan, do you have any additional thoughts?
That's my default state, is wanting to talk all the time. I apologize in advance. Yeah, I mean, just to expand upon that a little bit, I think I think there's a misconception with what engineers do all day. And it surprises people who are non-technical. They don't write code all day, right? They solve problems all day, right? And what you want to really have be a part of your interview process is really make them solve a problem that is close to your business, as close to that role as possible, and get them out of their head and obviously onto the interview, but really just talking out loud as much as possible to see how they would solve a problem, because engineering isn't about starting at A and ending at B. It is branching. You get surprised all the time. You have constraints come in either from product managers or other people, business constraints that then change your direction entirely and your constraints entirely. It's about problem solving on your feet. It's not about writing code. So testing that as much as possible is, if you do well at that, you'll make great hires.
Awesome. So let's stay right there, Nate. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, you mind if I just piggyback on something that Amber was saying, because I think that it's really important, is with regard to our rubrics that we need to create for technical interviews. For better or for worse, they can often be pretty rigorous, right? And oftentimes they can be more black and white than we want them to be. And when you have an interviewer who is trying to make sense of something that's happening in real time, sometimes these rubrics can actually be a little too rigorous when they're evaluating the way that somebody is working through code in live time. And so encouraging candidates to actually talk through their process is so important in a recruiter's job to prep candidates as they're stepping into these interviews, because don't leave it up to chance that that the interviewer is going to be able to give you the benefit of the doubt, because they're going to know exactly what you were thinking as you were going through the problem, right? Be able to allow them to read between the lines. Oftentimes our most experienced interviewers here at Cedar are able to give candidates the benefit of the doubt, even if they didn't necessarily meet the rule of the rubric to a T, because they're like, you know what? I think if they had maybe 5 more minutes, they would have been able to get to a working solution here. Or maybe if, they would have actually had this consideration, or, I would have been able to give them this slight hint here that I would have given in a pair programming session to somebody like this. They would have been able to easily solve this problem. And so, we see our interviewers able to actually give people the benefit of the doubt more often if they're actually knowing what their thought process is as they're working through the problem. So something we believe really, really strongly in here at Cedar is, prepping candidates properly as well for the interviews that they're going to be stepping into.
Love that. Nathan, so let's stick with you. How do you strike the right balance between technical depth and practical application during interviews?
I think I always start with practical application. And by the way, I also wanted to jump through the screen to say something else. Interviewing is really, really hard. And it's technical people are not going to pigeonhole myself too bad here, but technical people can be a little bit more terse in their communication, and getting them to interview really, really well is really, really difficult. So starting with, having somebody who's a great engineer on your team, starting with the practical application will usually then build out like, what technical depth do I need to be really, really solid on to get a good signal from this candidate? It really depends on what kind of problems you're trying to solve with that hire. I'll just give you an example. We're hiring engineers to continue to build out our insights product. And we start with, what do we want the product to look like, and how is this candidate going to be, or how is this person going to be solving problems when they start on this team? And then we work through, what are the technical constraints that they're going to have to fit into? Like, how much AI are they going to be using? What technologies are they going to be using? And that really then paints that picture of like how much technical depth you need to go into based on what kind of role this person is going to be playing when they start. So the answer is, it depends. Like if you're Western Digital and you're writing software for disk management, right? It's going to be extraordinarily technical because that's that job. So it's maybe a little bit of a cop-out answer, but it depends.
Any other thoughts on that besides it depends? Just giving you a hard time. So let's shift gears again, assessing communication and collaboration. I think it's important, really to hit all of these elements and to look at them objectively. We've talked a little bit about how engineering interviews or tech interviews can be very black and white, and sometimes they're viewed too stringently in that regard. And there's not as much like, I might not have asked the best question, let me rephrase it, sort of thing, and give the person another shot. So it's always good to think through that, from that perspective. So let's talk now about communication and collaboration. Tim, why don't you take this one? What are the most overlooked signals when evaluating a candidate's collaboration skills?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of things that we can really, try and focus on here. But, one of the big things that I often hear from, our interview process is, how are candidates able to handle ambiguity, like a little bit of ambiguity within a question. What's their natural instinct for collaboration, right? So, something that I hear across all of our technical interviews in debrief sessions from our interviewers is they never slowed down at the beginning to like actually ask clarifying questions up front, right? Like, that's something that we often like write down as a yellow flag over the course of our technical interviews is, did the person slow down enough to like actually clarify things up front? Because there is going to be a lot of ambiguity like built into like some of these real world scenarios that we're asking about. Whether they like make their thinking visible, which we talked quite a bit about like a question or two ago, is, how are they actually talking through their thought process, their trade-off decisioning, how they're like working through the problem in their head. And then, another thing that I hear come up often during debrief discussions with our hiring teams is, how did somebody actually take slight correction or feedback? Now, I think on the flip side of this, oftentimes candidates have gone through interview processes where they have been like hit with gotchas, right? And so maybe candidates are a little bit wary of like the correction or the feedback that they might be getting from an interviewer. Like, is this actually supposed to help me? However, like something that we're often hyper focused on is like, does somebody get defensive if one of our interviewers is giving them a hint or giving them a slight nudge? How are they taking that? Are they able to like take that and action it properly? Are some of the things that I know that we often look for.
Can I add on to that one?
Absolutely. Jump in.
I love this one. I think that this is where candidates can really stand out. And I think this is actually where recruiting can help out our businesses by asking these questions, even on a recruiter call, about, how do they handle constraints, right? What did you do when things went awry? Because we know technology doesn't always work out as perfectly as we plan it to. And something's always going to go awry. You're going to run into some type of constraint, some type of edge case. But the question that a lot of interviewers want to know is like, what did you do when that happened? Who did you collaborate with? What decisions did you make? And what were the trade-offs? I hear a lot of this. What was the technical debt that you either, decreased or increased? Like what happened in those moments? I think in that, everybody wants to be so perfect in the interview process that they forget about, man, when I had a really challenging time, what did I do and how did I course correct to get back to path towards green is what I hear a lot of companies say. But I think that candidates are afraid to show that weakness because it's a sign of weakness that I don't know something or that I didn't get it right the first time. I think that this is where we learn the most about a candidate, because now you found out that what you were doing wasn't working properly. How did you course correct? What did you do to fix it? And who did you bring along with you? Right? Were you the single point of failure, or did you actually have people that came along with you that can provide insights, or did this just affect one API? Did it affect the entire system? You want to understand the scale, the magnitude. So therefore, when you get into the interview process, you don't feel as uncomfortable talking about something that didn't go as planned, because we all know things don't go as planned. I think the famous word from Mike Tyson: everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so sometimes technology has a way of punching us in the mouth repeatedly. But how do you overcome those? How do you overcome the objections? And then if you have a clear path to doing something, but maybe not everybody's on the same page with you, how do you get buy-in? How do you get others to come along this journey with you? Even if sometimes it's kicking and screaming, we want to show the influence. We want to show the curiosity. We also want to show how you disambiguated a problem to get towards a solution. And so all of these things up front are things that I like to screen for in the beginning. And I think the worst answer that you can give as a candidate is saying that, oh, it worked out perfectly. We didn't have any constraints. It's up and running. It's fine. It's like, is it really? Because there's always something that is always continuous improvement or something that just doesn't work as properly. Like, dive into those things, because I think that they uncover the truth about who you are as a candidate and how you handle conflict to get to resolution.
Yeah, and I love the concept of candidates knowing what they know and knowing what they don't. I've had so many times managers would say they're really smart and they actually know what they don't know, so they know what to focus on as a learning curve coming in the door sort of thing, and we're happy to give them that support. So that can be just as important as well. So how do you assess a developer's communication style in a way that doesn't penalize introverts or non-native speakers? Amber, do you want to take a first crack at that one?
I mean, I'll try. I think this is a tough one to really nail. One thing I will say to, I don't remember if it was Nathan or was talking about like some of the awkwardness, social awkwardness, communication awkwardness that can be very present in technical interviews, frankly, even from the interviewers themselves, like that. It's a two-way street. I mean, we've got some folks out there that like they're doing interviews even though they don't really want to. They feel like they have to. And but I think the thing that we also have to remember, and I try to remind as like on the recruiting side, is like, we are doing this all the time. We're talking about this all the time. We're looking at interview feedback. The average candidate, someone who's really good at what they do, is maybe doing this 3 to 4 times in their lifetime, tops, right? Like, if they've been, the beneficiary of a great, being at a good company for a long time and haven't been laid off, or some, had some of those other things that happen, which, to be clear, isn't because they aren't good. Sometimes it's just the economic impact. But like, the reality is a lot of engineers don't really do this very often. They're not doing they're not doing interviews for sport like some people do. And so like they're stepping into an unknown territory. So I think like a bit of grace in that regard is something that's really important. I also used to encourage candidates to practice. I was like, go interview someplace you don't care about and you don't want to get the job, like just to get yourself out of like, it's just like shaking off the rust, right? But some of the things that I definitely suggest is like, the more you can have a candidate talk about work that they've already done versus like theoretical work or throwing something at them that's like a new challenge. Like, there's that like unconscious comfortability of like, I already know the content. So then they don't have to focus on two things at the same time. When you're trying to focus on solving a problem that's new to you in your mind and communicating well, if English isn't your first language, if provided the company's interviewing in English, or if there's other barriers there, you're just not as comfortable. Like your brain cannot focus on those two things at the same time. So I think getting a candidate to talk about and describe a project or work that they've already delivered or something that's in the past allows for them to then focus on their, like, be able to focus on the communication and not have to think about the problem, which is a good way to sometimes see someone more comfortably communicating. You kind of see their true communication style, and, you know, kind of asking them to talk through it, describe it. Tell me about the challenges. What didn't work? What was the success? What would you do differently if you had to approach it today, knowing what you know now? Like, I think those are sometimes good ways just to get people more comfortable and then see how they communicate. I think when we are all uncomfortable, we're horrible communicators. Like, even the best communicators, you know, if you put them on their feet and you say, you can't say or, and I'm going to throw a prompt at you. I mean, it's challenging. People are sweating. Like, it's all, you know, it just becomes this, like, we're all terrible communicators. So I feel like, you know, give them an optimal scenario and then assess that way. So that's one of the things that I would recommend.
So Tim, I want to hear from you, but I'm going to do a real quick commercial on disability inclusion and accessibility. Amber, you mentioned barriers. You know, I think there are some other barriers here that often get overlooked. There are people that are neurodivergent, and interviewers need to understand, just because I see something that's a little bit different, it doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean the person's not smart enough to do this job. They might have ADHD. They might be on the autism spectrum. They might have suffered from traumatic brain injury. They have trouble getting their thoughts out in a concise way. So if you see something different, maybe rephrase the question or give them another opportunity to answer that question. You can also stop the interview and say, is there anything I can do today to optimize your interview experience? And they might say, hey, would you mind copying and pasting the question into chat just so I can refer back to it, because you're asking me 3-part questions, which I'm horrible at. So by the time I get to the third part, I've completely forgotten it. So don't forget that there are people with disabilities that may not impact the way that they can be very successful at the job, but they might need that little bit of equity, you know, because they interact a little differently, or they absorb information a little bit differently. So keep that in mind for all the technical interviewers and all interviewers alike. And then Tim, I'll pass it over to you. Oh, by the way, that commercial was sponsored by my good friend Paul Meyer, who's part of the deaf and hard of hearing community. And he'd go off on a tangent at times about the lack of accessibility. But sorry to insert that here. Tim, you want to go ahead and give us your thoughts?
Never apologize for inserting that. I think it's such an important topic that doesn't get spoken about enough, and it doesn't get enough attention. You know, even if it's something that we on the recruiting side of things are hyper aware of and trying to make sure that we're you know, creating accessibility throughout the process. Somebody may have touched on this already, but, you know, I think oftentimes we assume that interviewers and hiring managers are informed on this as well. And so what's really, really important is that, you know, we provide that type of training and like knowledge sharing with our interviewers and our hiring managers, and that we aren't assumptive on the recruiting side of things, that's just, you know, something that's second nature for everybody that's going to be involved in the interview process, so that they can understand, like, how do I make sure that, you know, I'm creating as, you know, fair and equitable and accessible of an environment as possible over the course of like the interview loop, you know, in its entirety. I think Amber covered a lot of like really interesting points here that I would just second and piggyback on. But, you know, I think evaluating for like clarity of thought as opposed to charisma, I think a lot of times in an interview process, we can like really optimize and like get attached to a charismatic candidate that can like really create connection really easily and break down the walls of communication. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be the like best equipped candidate for all the other ins and outs that are required of the job. I think that there's little things that we can do over the course of the process, like, normalizing think time, right? Make it normal and make sure that the candidate knows that, hey, it's all right if you take a pause and think through how it is that you want to answer this question and your examples that you want to share, without feeling like you need to just dive in and fill the silence. I think any of us, when we're having whether it's like a tough conversation or, when we're uncomfortable, you feel this need to fill the silence, and not have like any of this sometimes like kind of dead air feeling, right? But like making sure a candidate knows that, hey, it's all right for you to like take a pause and make sure that you're answering this in the most effective way that you feel, and also use like multimodal communication opportunities, right? So some candidates are able to communicate or feel more comfortable communicating in different styles and different ways. And so what I would say is, like, over the course of an interview process, you want to make sure that you're giving candidates opportunities to be able to showcase their strengths and their ability to communicate in a variety of different fashions. Yeah, I know I've covered a lot of ground there. Not sure if there's any follow-up questions, or if Nathan or Leneric have anything to add on there, because I saw you both were nodding quite a bit there.
You're hitting some good topics, but I didn't. I was just like, yeah, I didn't think of that, but yes, that's right.
No, there's one thing I will add, that is something that frustrates me to death, but it's made me realize that some people communicate very, very differently and consume information very, very differently. There's many people, and this is true of our engineering team, that can't process information, like verbal information, really, really quickly in real time. I do that really well. So we make it a habit, both for when we interview people and for technical and non-technical topics, to make sure that we write down everything clearly and give people the space to consume it and actually really process all that information. And so how that extends to interviews is doing that exact same thing. There's a lot of people who can't react to somebody. I talk really fast, so somebody who talks really, really fast in real time. So just giving them that space to be able to consume the information in a way that everybody can is super important.
Can I make one more comment on that, Ron? Gene actually just put something in there. Gene Verthine. I'm not sure if I'm butchering your name, and I apologize. But she said something about this. It's up to the business to make sure that they're educating and giving their interviewers resources and tools to make sure they're equipped to go and handle those conversations. I know that when my time at some of the larger tech companies, there's this huge thing about unconscious bias and making sure you leave it at the door before you step to the interview process, albeit very difficult to do with anyone because it's part of who you are unconsciously. That's why it's called it. But I think that being able to properly equip the interviewer teams to, be able to effectively handle candidates that may not, like Tim said, their communication style may be a little bit different, or to Nathan's point, the way they receive information can be different. To even with Ambra, speaking out loud, some candidates like to internalize. And so making sure that we have multiple channels to reach that candidate to make sure that we're getting the best of what they can actually contribute to the interview process or to a company. I think that we need to be more equipped to handle that, because I think that we're going to see that a lot more. And we should be equipped, and we should make sure that we're not getting false positives or false negatives, I should say, for candidates that may not be able to communicate as effectively as others.
Yeah, thanks for that. Great points. Just so the panel knows, there is a question in the Q&A if anybody wants to take a swing at that. Question from Jen Jones in that Q&A tab. But Leneric, stay focused. I've got a question I'm going to throw your way. What's your approach to evaluating how a candidate receives and incorporates feedback in real time?
I absolutely love this question. I think that you learn a lot about a candidate once you're delivering feedback. And unfortunately, not a lot of companies give feedback to candidates. And so you don't really get a chance to actually, pick that up on them, because some companies don't even give you that opportunity to do it. But I'm thankful that I'm working at a company now with Bumble where they actually give you feedback throughout each interview stage throughout each interview stage. And the thing that I like to see is like how candidates receive that information. If they're combative of it, I don't necessarily write that off as a red flag. I dive a little bit deeper into it, even though it may be uncomfortable to hear some of the feedback. I want to dive into it to understand what ways could we have approached you a little bit differently to make sure we're getting the right interview data for you, or the way that they're curious to learn more. Well, what do you think I could have done better? The ones that are just, kind of push you away or keep you at arm's length distance are the ones that I think find it very difficult in the interview process or even in the workforce to receive constructive criticism that's there to help them, that's there to guide them, that's there to essentially use as like bumper rails. So if you start to go off the beaten path, well, we want to course correct you and get you back towards the path of green. But if you see the candidates are unreceptive to that feedback and they kind of shut down or they kind of want to get defensive by feedback that you're sharing based off the performance that they had just given, it's difficult for candidates to overcome that. I'm not sure how I educate candidates on that or how I educate individuals on that, because I think that's more of a individual trait. But I enjoy when candidates are very open and honest about, yeah, you know what, I did miss that. And here's why I missed it. And more times than not, I understand that candidates maybe just don't have the opportunity in their current work environment to have hands-on access or to have the type of scale that they want to or that's needed in the job that they're interviewing for. But what I try to give them is takeaways. So if you don't have that opportunity to do it in your current environment, where can you seek other ways to do that? And try to reason with them on, hey, maybe it's not it's not a no, it's just a not right now is what I tell candidates. And if you really want to go after it, then here's the tools that you can use to kind of help yourself into the next interview process, whether that's with me or my company or with any other company. Our goal as recruiters is to try to set you up to be successful in the industry versus just one company. And so those candidates that love to take that feedback and receive it, even if they don't get the role, I think it's a critical time for us to, be aware of those unconscious biases that you may have on how you approach the solution. And so I really love when companies allow the TA team to give feedback. It's just, I think this is something that needs to, I know there's a lot of legal ramifications if done poorly, but if done properly, I think this creates a stronger engineering community that, people are aware of their blind spots. So it helps them in their next career.
Slow clap, Leneric. I love that. Definitely think that we need to be giving feedback. Again, you don't have to be brutally honest, but to share something so somebody can take away and say, okay, I was qualified for the job, but there was somebody else that had really specific domain expertise that got selected over me. I know that I'm not crazy. I was doing well, sort of thing can be really helpful and can, help with the morale of an individual that might've been looking for a job for a long time. Any other thoughts on that before we shift gears? All right, we'll shift gears to talking about reducing candidate stress and maintaining rigor. I think this is a really important one. We kind of touched on this along the way. I think it's important to create that great environment for the candidate because it is a pressure-packed, high stress environment to be interviewing. Some people in particular have a really tough time. So Tim, let's go back to you. What interview elements tend to cause the most stress for candidates in your estimation, and how can we redesign around them?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned ambiguity a couple of times so far, and I think that ambiguity has really become like such a interesting buzzword across the industry these days, where it can be a huge benefit to a company to be able to work in ambiguity effectively because it is going to be present in just about every role for an engineer. But also, you want to make sure that you don't over-index on that and, give the team a pass for not creating enough clarity on as it pertains to interview questions and what the expectations are. And so, I think whenever somebody is stepping into an interview, that is going to be a stressful situation for most individuals. I think somebody mentioned it already. I believe it was Ambra about, hey, most folks are not just out there interviewing all the time. Oftentimes you're going to be, representing candidates that haven't interviewed in years. And so, that's going to be a stressful situation for them to have to put their skills to the test in an environment that, for better or for worse, is going to be different than what an actual work environment is. I mean, how often are you going to have to solve something as an engineer in 60 minutes, right? And so those having unclear expectations within the interview is going to be one of the biggest things that, I believe is going to create additional stress for an interviewer. I think insufficient prep materials is something that we see often and we hear about often from candidates. And so it's something that we feel very, very strongly about, at Cedar, as well as I just feel strongly about myself personally, is providing candidates with ample prep materials. Help them to understand as best as possible what they're stepping into without obviously giving too much away from the problem. But I think that there's a lot of ways that you can do this effectively, and you can do this pretty simply without giving too much away. But we want to make sure that we're reducing as much stress as possible, because I think Amber also said this as well, as when somebody is like in fight or flight, they're not going to be able to put their best foot forward. And so if we want to make sure that we're evaluating the best versions of the candidates that are entering into our pipeline, we want to make sure that they're prepped with as much as they possibly can be there. Some other things that come to mind is, if there's any like high pressure adversarial coding environments, or if we're not making it feel like a real world collaboration is another one, right? Like, how often as an engineer are you going to be solving a problem in 60 minutes while somebody stares at you blankly, right? You want to make sure that we're creating a environment that mimics as much as possible something that feels more like pair programming, and that like a candidate feels comfortable that they can bounce ideas or questions off of the interviewer. Those are some of the immediate things that come to mind.
Awesome. Staying on that same topic, and then I'll let anybody else share thoughts. How can companies then create a less intimidating experience without really lowering the bar?
I can jump in real quick. I think
Sure.
that identifying the best interviewers within your company is a good place to start, and then equipping them with the tools they need to accurately assess, such as playbooks, or such as if there's a rubric that the team needs to create. That's why I think interviewing is so difficult, because there are certain things that even interviewers have to stay within. They can't just go off the beaten path, because there's specific data points that we need, or a company may need to make the best hiring decision. So I think equipping them with the tools is the probably one of the first easy wins. The other piece is building rapport with the candidate. I think if you're the interviewer that just jumps straight into an interview process, I don't think anybody would like that. I know I personally wouldn't like it. I want you to get to know me as an individual first, versus just a candidate coming in and interviewing. The interview process is designed to make sure that both sides are interviewing each other. And if we're just jumping into trying to solve a problem, how do you ever know who I am as a person? So I think it's very, very important to leave room for that rapport in the beginning, and not just the basic, hey, I'm this, or 7 degrees separation. But I always ask candidates, how did you get into technology and why have you stayed? That's a great opening question, just to allow them to speak freely and kind of let their guard down a little bit, so I can get a little glimpse of who they are, and then try to address them and approach them, based off of that information, versus just staying in the robot mode of, I have questions, you have answers, ask, receive. It just, you want to make sure that you're talking to people. In the world it's so automated, I think the interview process is the place where we can truly bring that humanity back into it, by having that connection just through a conversation, even if it is for an hour, regardless of the outcome. I think we need to take time to make sure we're connecting.
Thanks. That's awesome. Amber, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, just to chime in on a couple additional things. I think companies would do well to consider what I would call like a like me component in their interview process, which is to say, like, is there some common ground that one of the interviewers has with the candidate? Not saying the interview is any different. It's still the same interview category, but I used to look for, and still do, like, we look for things like, is this person also, did they relocate maybe, as well? And this candidate's considering relocation. Maybe they graduated from the same school, or they spent some time at the same company at some point. There is just something that happens when you get in the room or on Zoom or wherever your tool you're using with somebody that has like some sort of common ground with you as a candidate. And you can relate on that level. And so I think trying to figure out how you can do that in a way that doesn't feel like condescending or disingenuous And like an example of disingenuous is like giving a female engineering candidate a loop that's entirely women. It's like, well, that's not actually a realistic in most companies. So like, let's not like pander, let's be realistic, but also like, it's not great if someone goes through 7 to 8 interviews over the course of their time with the company and they haven't had a single woman on their panel, right? So I think there's like a fine line, but I definitely think thinking about things like that in the process. The other thing I would mention is, and this is maybe less about in the actual interview process with the candidate, but I think candidates find a lot of comfort knowing that an employee reference actually means something. And I say that not as like a cop out, but I think companies would do very well to have a good rubric that they give their own employees on how they would evaluate somebody that they're putting into their process as a reference, as a referral. And that should hold some weight. I mean, I've worked places where candidate did not do well in their interview process, and on their own, like that would have been a no hire. But the strength of the internal reference, or 2 to 3 internal references on that person, which say, I don't care how that person performed in the interview process. We have worked with them for years, and we can tell you that they know how to do this job well, and they will be a high performer. And then we end up hiring that person, and they are a high performer indeed, which kind of just shows that like the interview process is a very imperfect thing. So I think making sure that your interview process is not the only thing by which you make your hiring decisions. There has to be some adjudication of the process.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Any other thoughts there? All right, Nathan, let's switch back over to you. Are there any interview practices that have helped you consistently put candidates at ease while still assessing them rigorously?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been said before, but treat them like a human, right? Like, and this is really hard if you're hiring at scale too, by the way. If you've got a senior engineer who's got deadlines and, you know, he's working all the time and he's also got to interview 8 people a week, right? Like at some point that's going to get really, really old, but that's just how hiring goes sometimes if you're hiring really, really fast. So I think a constant reminder to treat every single candidate as a human being that you are seriously considering for the job and you are considering working with is, I mean, that's the most important thing to do. And if you do that really, really well, they'll perform as good as they can, right? If you go first in the interview and introducing yourself, if you show them that you're vulnerable enough to give a little bit of yourself to them, they'll do the same and they'll open up and the interview will be a lot better. So there's that. And then there's also just preparation, right? Like one of the things that we do in preparing candidates for interviews, and this has been touched on a whole bunch already, is, you know, obviously you don't want to give interview questions away because you want to see how they think on their feet, but you want to know like the ballpark of questions that they're going to be potentially, you know, approached with. Like, hey, we're going to be solving a problem that has to do with these technologies. You're going to be expected to use AI in the interview. You're going to be pair programming with somebody senior on the team, and just letting them know what they're walking into just sort of disarms the whole situation to begin with. And it just sets it off on a much better foot than just bringing them in blind and saying, I don't know, we're going to ask you some stuff and hopefully you're good. See you later. So treat them like a human, prepare them well, and it'll go reasonably well. And they hopefully should be a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, I think if you get away from treating it just as a transaction, like I'm buying a candy bar at the store, handing you money, you're handing me the candy bar, see you later, you can actually have a conversation, right, and be friendly. Amber, I think we probably just have like a minute left, but we'll end with you.
Oh gosh, that's a lot of pressure. Okay, well, I was just going to chime in and say that I think it goes both ways too. I think making sure the interviewer is prepped to talk to the candidate as best you can as well, which isn't like, obviously there's a resume there, but I think any kind of anecdotal feedback or things that you can share with that interviewer so that when they show up, there's some continuity and it doesn't feel like they're just coming in blind. Like, wait a minute, how many people have you talked to? Am I the first? Am I the fifth? I have no idea, right? Like, I think kind of giving them that context of like, oh man, you've had a long day. You've talked to 4 people already on your last interview. Like, you know, that kind of thing I think also helps and goes a long way too.
Yeah, awesome. I was expecting Josh to pop in here any second, but if he doesn't, we can maybe try to squeeze in one more. Oh, there he is. I knew it was happening. I felt it.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and thank you to this amazing panel. I learned a lot. I got a lot of comments on LinkedIn and kind of direct messages as well, but the content here was just absolutely phenomenal. I think we touched on a lot of things. Huge thank you to CoderPad for making this presentation possible. As always, we will get the recording out to everyone within a few minutes of the webinar ending. If anybody has any questions, we're all pretty easy to find. This was the last webinar of the year, I believe. I don't think we're going to have another one, so we'll see you very soon in Q1, January. And stay tuned for more content, and thanks for supporting this program.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, y'all.